retrograde. It went direct back on August 11th, 2025, and this put an end to this process that we've been in the thick of since June of this year, just all summer, thinking about Leo themes. And what is Leo? Leo is creativity, our vitality, energy, identity, these things with this summer combined with Saturn and Aries trying to reprocess who we are now that we're older, now that we've been through certain trial and error processes as well. I know that I've talked a lot about the creative process of Leo this summer and how very often we will run into many failures before we find our success. So it's possible that we were finding those things that were draining our vitality before, the things that Mars and Virgo really brought to light, whether that was health issues or communication issues, things that needed to be cleaned or severed out of our lives so that we can move forward with greater vitality and creativity in the future. We will actually fully pass its station degree on August 25th, so we're probably still in that processing mode of integrating everything that we've learned over the last couple of months. It's possible that things that were repeated through the retrograde are showing up now and resolving themselves finally. Mercury will officially move out of Leo and into Virgo on September 2nd, 2025. And that starts, I mean, really before then, it starts the season of Virgo, this signature of Virgo that we're going to be talking a lot about over this next month or two. Something else that I think would be really great to recap now that we're reaching the end of August is that Mars-Saturn opposition that we saw near the full moon in Aquarius around the 9th of August. And this was a time where a lot of people saw challenges showing up in their lives in a very real way. And, I've heard stories, have seen people processing and integrating these things. And this is a moment usually when doors are closing, obstacles appear kind of out of nowhere. But something that really softened this opposition was the kiss of the benefics, the Jupiter-Venus conjunction that we saw in Cancer. That happened really shortly after that conjunction, and I think it made everybody's lives a lot sweeter. And because of that conflict, we were able to rely on maybe our connections, or maybe there are other resources that pulled through as a result of this war theme that shows up with Saturn and Aries. Mars in Libra especially often shows us where we are taking action to keep the peace for other people or trying to make other people happy. But Saturn and Aries, this summer we saw the preview of this journey back to the self, back to the core identity, and putting our needs first, our own desires above other people, what other people want. Because when you're making a decision for you, then it is the best decision for other people. And I have written in my notes here this quote, which is, early success does not often stand the test of time. So that's another thing that people are probably seeing, these things that they want to be successful, they're breaking down. This is, again, a part of that creative process that we talk so much about with Mercury and Leo. This is a time where things are breaking down because there may be more responsibility, more commitment that's needed to a certain journey. And a lot of us are going these journeys alone, these lessons in our lives all by ourselves. Other people may be able to empathize with us during this time, especially with that Jupiter-Venus conjunction, but nobody's really experiencing what we are experiencing in our bodies. A big message that I feel like I've been getting this summer is the commitment to the long game. It's chess, not checkers. And anything that is early in success or comes through for us in the beginning, it doesn't always last. It may be a little bit of beginner's luck this time. So now that we've kind of recapped this summer in astrology, the Mercury retrograde, the Mars-Saturn opposition, what's coming up next? We have these two new moons in Virgo coming up, and we have one at the very beginning of the sign at 0 degrees Virgo and one at the very end of Virgo at 29 degrees. Each sign is going to have 30 degrees of the sign. 29 is a critical degree because it's the very last one before it enters the next sign. And 0 degrees, of course, is this purest expression. You'll hear it called a lot of the sign. So we get two very critical new moons in Virgo that are really trying to kickstart something new here, but at the same time, they're conjunct to the South Node in Virgo, which again, we've talked a little bit about this with the Mars South Node conjunction, which was ruled by Mercury retrograde. I kind of talked about how that energy, that vitality that we need from our Leo sectors, it could have been drained at that moment by anything that was sort of stuck in our Virgo sectors. And so now we have this chance, now that we've done some clearing this summer, and especially with our first eclipse cycle that we had our first lunar eclipse in Virgo back in the spring of 2025. Now we are starting new in this area. New moons are symbolically this new start. Mercury brings change through its messages and its revelations. And so if you can change your mind, you can change your behavior. And then if you change your behavior, then you're making different decisions. And then your decisions ripple out and affect all of the things that happen in your life. This first new moon in Virgo is pretty significant because it's the first major aspect that we get to Uranus and Gemini. And while Uranus did enter Gemini back in July of this year, we likely haven't, unless it's aspecting some personal planet in your chart, it's very likely that we haven't fully seen these stories play out in a real way yet. And I think that we're going to be seeing that for the first time this fall and going into November too, before Uranus heads back into Taurus to finish up its journey there. Now that we have a Mercurial ruled Uranus transit, we're going to be having this radicalization of the mind that's happening here. And just to recap, Uranus and Taurus, with Uranus and Taurus these last 7 years since 2018, this is a radicalization in our values, right? And our resources as well. We've seen a lot of financial changes. We've seen extreme shifts in the financial system, not only personally, but also as a nation and globally as well. This has been a time where we've been seeing really surprising changes to tradition, or even kind of the unexpected backslide into tradition. I'm thinking about like Roe v. Wade, for example. I feel like that really was that backslide moment. But also Uranus and Taurus is going to have a harder time naturally. I mean, it's fixed Earth, right? So an earthquake is not the most comfortable thing. Whereas now we have Uranus in Gemini, even though it's going to be making that retrograde backwards, Uranus in Gemini is more compatible. I think the mind is more changeable than maybe something more physical, tangible that we can see out in the world. So Uranus and Gemini, it has this agenda to change our minds. And while I think that is more harmonious, with Uranus's themes, Uranus is Prometheus, it's the god of invention and giving the fire to humanity, allowing these revelations to take over humanity and surprise us in these amazing ways. I think that can be really compatible with the mind, and yet it's also something that we have to sort of defeat the rigidity of our minds as well. Uranus and Gemini is producing these entirely new ways of speaking, communicating, thinking, and I think AI has been a really big part of that. It's been a huge signification of these Gemini and Aquarius transits that we've been having over the last couple of years, between Mars retrograde in Gemini that we've had Pluto moving into Aquarius as well. We had Saturn that was in Aquarius a couple years ago. And so, just like the smartphone has taken over, right? At one point, this was a technology that was completely new. It was an invention. It's very Uranian, right? This invention that shocks humanity and expands the amount of things that we can do in our world. And now that's integrated in our way of life, our way of living, and our jobs. Most jobs you can't have without a smartphone now, right? So that Pluto and Gemini transit, it happened back in the 18 and 1900s. This was the first actual functional automobile was created back during the transit in 1885 through 1886, but the first mass-produced automobile was in 1901 during a Uranus-Pluto opposition in Gemini and Sagittarius, and these are signs of travel, right? These outer planets, Uranus, Pluto, Neptune, this has been a great revolution this year in 2025. And these are the planets that are going to change the fabric of our world. This is something that I've been saying a lot lately. And it's evolution of the consciousness of humanity. What is possible? What are we conscious of? This is what these planets are responsible for. And so the automobile, this was a big invention, a big revolution. And now, again, we rely on that technology for our livelihoods. I know too that there are some really valid ethical concerns about AI, the future of AI. And, it was the same thing with the smartphones, with the cars. None of these things are actually good for the world. They're not necessarily good for humans either. I mean, people get into car crashes all the time. Our smartphones are kind of taking over our brains, and we've come up with these new phrases as a result, like, bed rotting. These things have really changed how society functions. And it's not always for the benefit of society. There are benefits, but it's not always the best thing for us. This is a really valid dilemma, but everything requires a sacrifice. These are going to be bringing up some really valid survival concerns in the future, because if we're not able to adapt, then the world is going to keep turning anyway. So anyway, back to this new moon in Virgo, right? It's going to square Uranus, and it's giving us this elbow grease that we need to awaken the Promethean archetype, or rather have Prometheus awaken us. And a big reason for this is, the eclipse season is starting in September. This is a time where new information that comes up around these mercurial transits, they're going to be changing our course in a really major way. And so, while this new moon is not an eclipse, it is a doorway into the second new moon, which is. And I think that it could be pretty revolutionary in our own personal lives at the start of this Uranus transit. So September, this is a month that it's a really great time to pay attention to Mercury. This is the messenger, the trickster, the communicator. He's the friend, the guide to the underworld as well, the map. Mercury can show us the way in our lives at this time. On September 1st, Saturn is actually going to be retrograding back into the sign of Pisces. And this is pretty significant because we're finishing up a 3-year journey that we've been on since March of 2023. And while we've had this Saturn and Aries transit this summer, we've gotten a glimpse into the challenges that we're going to be seeing starting next year in 2026 and for the next 3 years after that. But first, we have something to finish up, to reintegrate, and to really understand about what we've been learning over the last several years. Folks have been experiencing Saturn and Pisces as a massive time of loss and loss of faith, potentially just struggling too with your faith and your journey, your past. This is a time where people have been feeling lost, and it's been bringing up those spiritual and emotional grapplings that help us get through life. It may be a lot easier too to reach for experiences that numb out feelings that we've been having, and Saturn has really been trying to work through those things. So Saturn and Pisces has been kind of a delinquency transit. I've seen a lot of people go pretty crazy with substances, or with anything that makes you feel good, that helps you reach that state of euphoria and distraction. Now, Saturn and its last leg of Pisces, we're really trying to ground and really understand why have we been experiencing all of these things. Is it easier or better to numb out things, or is it easier to face them and to feel the loss and the grief, that we can ultimately get closer and break our hearts open to connect with something deeper? Collectively, this has been a time of grief, and maybe you or a loved one have been struggling with things like substance abuse, mental health, illnesses, physical illness, maybe even like romantic limerence. I think that that's been a really important conversation over the last few years. These things really take over, and I think it's really important to reflect on these experiences, the consequences of blurred boundaries, right? When things are not clear, how do you proceed? Hopefully Saturn and Pisces, this retrograde, this last about 5 months that we're going to be seeing Saturn and Pisces finishing up here, I hope that this is a time where we're able to recognize where we've succeeded in becoming softer and more creative, and maybe even stronger in our faith, hopefully, as a result of everything. Maybe you've experienced a lot of healing because of this transit. The final chapter of Saturn and Pisces is going to reinforce the immense growth that we've been seeing over the last couple of years. I find that very, very common with these last moments of a Saturn transit. Saturn and Pisces from the beginning has really reminded me of those parents who push their baby into the deep end of the pool to teach them how to swim. And while that's a really harsh way, to approach that learning experience, I think that Saturn and Pisces, it will hopefully remind you that now you have your legs, you can swim because you have been pushed into the deep end. Astrology is the study of history. And, as much as we talk about collective history, maybe we go back to look at some revolutionary wars that we've had, or the beginning of automobiles, right? But it's also our personal history. And I think that that's why people are so drawn to astrology, is making sense of their own self, their own lives, their own personal history. So go back to the beginning of 2023. Were there any commitments that you made around that time? Were there experiences that showed up that, suddenly were very challenging, that had you confront your softness, or how you emotionally open up to people, or even those grapplings with larger themes of faith? I won't go too much into detail just yet with these eclipses, but just know that we have these this eclipse season coming up in September. We've got the first lunar eclipse on the 7th of September, and that solar eclipse in Virgo on the 21st. This is going to be a continuation of whatever happened back in spring of this year. In March, when we had that first, I believe it was a lunar eclipse in Virgo, and we also had a lunar eclipse in Pisces back in the fall of 2024. I think it was September or October. But we've already, kind of gotten a glimpse of this axis. We know that Virgo and Pisces, it often deals with caretaking, it deals with healing. This is an axis that is about big picture versus the details, the things that we need to clean up, also what it means to build something new in the wake of that. And so I think that this time is it's going to be a time for establishing new things in these areas of life, these sectors of our charts that Virgo and Pisces rule. Of course, with Saturn and Pisces too, Saturn moving back into the sign around eclipse season is so symbolic. And I think that it's also really interesting. We've had these Saturn nodal experiences, not just Saturn Neptune, Saturn nodal experiences, which are, adds another layer to everything that we've been experiencing. I've been talking a lot about how Saturn Neptune, we haven't even seen that aspect perfect yet. It's going to perfect next year in 2026 in the sign of Aries. And so I think that, we're all building to that point next year. But at the same time, we've already been seeing those Saturn Neptune themes. It started back in Pisces. They were already very close together. And Saturn Neptune is a time of redrawing boundaries, dissolving walls. We talked last video about, the fall of the Berlin Wall. We talked about the American Revolution, about times where, or World War I as well, times where we were literally redrawing national boundaries, and that happens on a personal level during this time. So you're probably dissolving a lot of limits that were keeping you hostage, holding you back in this year of 2025. Adding in the nodal aspect to that, adding in the North Node in Pisces to all of this Saturn and Pisces, Neptune and Pisces stuff that's happening for the end of the year and at the beginning of this year, that can bring some really sharp turns, random things that feel fated, feel very destined, and like they wouldn't have happened without some other hand, in your life. So that Saturn nodal experience is really challenging, because we have the planet of discipline, its limits and time, running into these agents of fate and direction. It can present as something fairly heavy, but it also presents us with karmic time, which is a kind of soul food too, that anchors our lives in the mystic and the unknown. The fact that we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, we don't know what our lives are going to look like at the end of eclipse season. I think that in some ways that's really comforting, especially if you aren't happy somewhere in your life, which is very possible with Saturn being such a challenge here. So anyway, I really hope that this brought you some clarity around what's happening astrologically, what we might be experiencing this year, the new inventions that are opening up our worlds right now and changing the course of our lives. This is a huge year with all of these outer planets being involved. So I wish you all, happy processing, happy Virgo new moon. Be open to the Promethean way here.